tired of looking at the page and guessing, like, where are we? Yeah. Okay. So, for those who don't know, we're in the final stretch of Philosophy of Nature by Hegel, and we're getting into the part that says the genus and the individual. I'm going to go ahead and read 371, the disease of the individual, and see where we land as far as discussion goes. Um, I've been reading Harrison Plus's dialectics entry in the Sage book of Marxism, which is like 3 volumes and impossibly expect. It's like $400 or $500. Kyle uh, sent me um, sent me an excerpt so that I could read Harrison's article, and it's really helpful, and it also helps to situate dialectics uh philosophically to the the version of dialectics that we care about as Marxists is the one that was derived from Hegel, but really it was started by Kant. Kant started Kant brought it back. Uh eh, before before Kant, the only person who really like uh thought dialectically, even if incompletely, was Spinoza. And so um, all the way up to today, it looks like philosophy. If you ask anybody who knows anything about it, they run somewhere along the the spectrum from Kant to Fichte to Schelling and then to Hegel. Unless you're a pragmatist and like an American pragmatist, and then that's a whole other thing. But even those forefathers, yeah, pragmatist forefathers studied Hegel and take take quite a few things from him. So I'm gonna uh reading that and coming back to Hegel again, it was really helpful for me and sort of helped me situate how some of this works. And at the same time, dialectic is not something that it it's something that you can characterize with pretty general statements, but the general statements are not the dialectic. The dialectic is what you find with the content. And so as we read through the philosophy of nature, what I've noticed is that the dialectic is what turns out to be the structure of the content of the material that we've been going through. Um, it's baked into reality, it's baked into thought, it's baked into all of this. Uh, and part of Hegel's project is to not assume that the development of the concepts and thought, the idea, as it were, is going to go this way or that. It's going to go its own way, like in the song, I guess. Okay, so this is the genus and the individual. It's 371. In the two preceding relationships, the self-mediation of the genus with itself is the process of its diremption into individuals and the sublation of its difference. But since the genus also assumes the shape of external universality of an inorganic nature against the individual, it attains an existence in the latter in an abstract negative manner. In this relationship of an external existence, the individual organism can just as well not conform to its genus as preserve itself in it through its return into self. It finds itself in a state of disease when one of its systems or organs, stimulated into conflict with the inorganic power, establishes itself in isolation and persists in its particular activity against the activity of the whole, the fluidity and all pervading process of which is thus obstructed. So, so you have an individual that's part of a genus, and it starts to become diseased in some way, and so it falls away from the universal definition of what the genus is, but it is still an individual of that genus. Okay, So it is and it isn't in this disease state. I guess you could say he's trying to say. Sorry, I'm just really freaking thirsty.
Mm.
Uh, in the Zuzats, he brings up health and disease, um, and even quotes Heraclitus, which is very interesting because Heraclitus is the patron saint, practically Greek patron saint of change. Um, so while the division of animal life is the animal type in itself, so now in disease, the individual is capable of one particularization which does not accord with this notion. Here too, therefore, the deficiency of the individual subject and face of the genus is still not removed, but the individual is both in itself and in its opposition to itself genus. It is itself alone in the genus and has it within itself. This is the disharmony to which the animal is now subjected and with which it comes to an end. Um, Health is the due relation of the organic self to its real existence. That is, all its organs are fluid in the universal. It consists in the commensurate relationship of the organic to the non-organic, so that for the organism there is nothing non-organic which it cannot overcome. Disease does not consist in an irritation being too great or too small for the susceptibility of the organism. Rather, is its notion a disproportion of its being in itself, not a disproportion between factors which exist separately from within the organism. Oh, this is really high flown. Diseases arise when the organism is separated from its inner sides, which are not factors but whole real sides. The cause of disease lies partly in the organism itself, like aging, dying, and congenital defects. Uh, whew.
I posted,
This is difficult to read.
yeah, I did post Chat GPT's take on that.
Yeah. Did you make heads or tails of it? I didn't read it.
Well, easy to understand the AI than it is to understand Hegel.
Yeah. Disease is a disproportion between irritation and the capacity of the organism to respond.
Yeah.
Okay. Heraclitus says excess of heat is fever, excess of cold, paralysis, excess of air, suffocation. The reason why the organism can be irritated beyond its capacity is that, being equally the complete unity of possibility and actuality, it is wholly under each of the two forms. All right. So basically, there's the definition of something, and there's the breakdown. And he's basically saying disease and staying what you are is a kind of dialectic. Like you're both still yourself, even if you're diseased, or if you're yourself without the disease, you're still, you know, yourself.
Uh,
I'm not exactly sure why this is important necessarily, but he
in
felt it.
ancient Greek medicine, there was the idea that the disease and imbalance in the body would, what the four humors, if you're out of balance, you would be sick. If you're in balance, you're healthy.
Yeah,
And I think he's building off of that. I mean, that was still, I mean, that approach to medicine was, no, it still had currency even in Hegel's day. So,
yeah, yeah. So there seems to be some kind of philosophical debate going on in the
yeah.
wider community as to whether, it's one way or the other.
Yeah, I
And
what Bruno was it the Brunonian model at this time because as again it was a quanti I'm just reading I threw it to my AI thing, but it because it pulls directly from Hegel. Apparently at this time it was another quantitative idea where it's like, oh, you just build up an irritation until it's too much for the being. But it's like that's a quantitative not becoming allegedly becoming qualitative, but not really done that way. What is it? His own disease is not disproportionate between factors that exist separately in an organism, but it's disproportionate to the organ's being in itself. So it's like, example, like for me, my immune system actually what became against myself, which is against the health, against the fluid flow of the whole, the parts in the whole.
yeah.
So when the parts are against, there's a part against the whole, is how he views it.
Hmm.
Because in that sense, now it's become it usurps the whole from itself.
Okay. So,
Okay, I mean this was
so one type of disease is injury, basically. Another general type is caused by particular external harmful influences. A third form, a third form is basically mental, terror, grief, so forth. Okay, so his definition, his definition of disease is really either injury or getting sick or you know the disease of the soul, the mental illness.
yeah dis-ease, yeah.
It's fascinating that Hegel is willing, even at this very early juncture, to include uh, the mentally ill as diseased, and gives us. I mean, I'm seeing PTSD written all over this. If you're terrorized and you're living in the aftermath, your soul is diseased. I find it I find it very interesting that he uses the word soul, because in the philosophical realm of discussion in which Hegel is a part, Hegel's is Hegel's conclusion of the science of logic is that we don't have souls, we have brains. Okay. The meaning of the absolute idea turning out to be nature is the same thing as saying we have brains, they produce thoughts, and these brains are organic in nature. The end. So he's a Spinozist. He doesn't want everyone to think he's Spinozist, so he's loaded up his books with attacks on Spinoza, but we've talked about this before.
Yep.
But when he's talking about the diseases of the soul here, I think he's just being idiomatic. Um, because if he really did believe in a soul, then he would try to prove what Descartes tried to prove, which is there's a split between mind and body, and the mind is a supernatural entity, and he doesn't think that at all. Uh, I just find the language interesting that it pops up that way. It's got to be idiomatic. So in 372, he says the characteristic manifestation of disease is therefore that the identity of the entire organic process displays itself as the successive course of the vital movement through its distinct moments, sensibility, irritability, and reproduction, i.e., as fever, such as fever, which, however, as process of the totality in opposition to the isolated activity, is just as much the effort towards and the beginning of cure. Okay.
Because both at the same time, right?
Yeah. We've seen that the notion of disease is that the organism separates itself into its separate moments. Now we have to consider more detailed the course of disease. The first state is that it's virtually present, but without any actual morbidity. Second state the disease becomes for the self. There's established in the self in opposition to it as universal, a determinateness which makes its own self into a fixed self. The self of the organism becomes a fixed existence, a specific part of the whole. Okay, but the disease also spreads into the general life of the organism. For when one organ is affected, there is also an infection of the whole organism. Okay. And then we go down and he describes fever.
1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, the individual who gets a disease uh, exits the universal and enters the particular. And when the animal when when the organism recovers, he leaves the particular and re-enters the universal as far as being human or dolphin or whale or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, what was it? The thing I got here is saying this is the dialectical movement as well. I'm trying to see. Did you talk about liver actually at any point? Because I didn't see. So,
Yeah, there was like gallstones and bile and stuff.
well, it's I'll just again. I'm reading this briefly because it goes over it. I think pretty quickly from again Claude. Hegel then gives genuine dialectical account of disease's movement, not just its static definition. A local irritation isolates one system against the whole. Two, the local affection spreads sympathetically. His example, overstimulates the liver and the whole body becomes liver through and through. So the liver, this takes over the whole. And then the affection becomes an affection to our organism, as this is totalization is fever. So it's something that starts at one point that then spreads out to the entire body, which makes it, the disease in its most purest form, which is of the whole, which then also itself is the cure of the disease. Because, the fever is designed there to kill the disease.
Yeah.
So it's another process of movement. I guess, again, where the particular individual becomes part of a whole again, because dialectics. Yeah. It's fluid and cures the organism's fluidity, its ideality, into which no organ is self-subsistent, reasserting itself over the moment of fixation. So it's the universal of the body reasserting itself over the particular. In terms of the whole with the parts, and as you said, re-enters the genus as healed. Oh, that's a dialectic of a dialectic.
Yeah. I feel you, brother. I'm just as confused.
I can see
but,
it there.
but
like
I mean, but not really. I mean, I'm not really confused, but at the same time, I'm like,
it's complex.
Yeah.
That's what dialectic is, anyways, right? It's an interrelationship, and those things get complicated fast.
Yeah. So now, okay, so now we have therapy. The medicine provokes the organism to put an end to the particular irritation in which the formal activity of the whole is fixed and to restore the fluidity of the particular organ or system within the body. This is brought about by the medicine as an irritant, but one which is difficult to assimilate and overcome, so that the organism is confronted by something alien to it against which it is compelled to exert its strength. In acting against something external to it, the organism breaks out from the limitation with which it had become identified and which it was entangled and against which it cannot react so long as the limitation is not an object for it. So what the fuck does this mean?
That's what
Okay,
I
well,
actually just said, I think.
I think you're right. The main point of view from which medicine must be considered is that it is an indigestible substance. But this is a relative term, not, however, in the vague sense that only what is tolerable by weaker constitutions is to be called easily digestible. On the contrary, such substances are indigestible for the stronger individuality. The immanent relativity, that of the notion which has its Gretchen, Gretchen, keep it down. The immanent relativity, that of the notion which has its actuality in life, is of qualitative nature and consists, when expressed quantitatively, in the homogeneity being greater the more the opposed terms are intrinsically self-subsistent. He lost me, man. Do you know what he's talking about?
For more of the opposed terms are intrinsically self. The immanent relativity of the notion, which has its actuality in life, that's the universal, which expressed quantitatively. So it's a measure with expressed quantitatively. So far, standpoint is valid here. In the homogeneity being greater, being, I guess, the universal being greater there, and the more the opposed terms are intrinsically self-subsistent. It's kind of like it's the more of the universal is universal, the more of its subsequent components are self-supportive. And so it's sort of parts of the whole.
Yeah, I think I see what this means. So you get lower down in the life forms or
Yeah.
young, you see how like milk is already digested water and nutrients.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's easiest to digest for baby as opposed to just solid food and water, right? It has to be, like the bird, in a different circumstance, the bird chews its children's food before feeding the children the food because that's the only thing that is digestible is the already digested food, so on and so forth. That's what he's talking about. And indeed, like he said, substances of this kind are, on the other hand, indigestible for mature and robust constitutions, which more easily digest individual animal substances or plant juices, which some land has matured to a powerful individuality, so on and so forth. Okay.
And the thing is, if you're going sticking with the milk example, milk is, for adults, milk is digestible mostly like for Northern Europeans, but for many like Asian peoples, adults have a hard time digesting milk.
There's a there's a story, or maybe it was in a movie I saw, but a dying pope, like they tried to keep the pope alive and he was dying, and they brought in a nursemaid and had him uh I know feed directly from the wet nurse in hopes that, the pope lived for another day. Uh I want to be present for such conversations, okay? Like you really think this is a good idea? Okay. But as I understand it, they tried damn everything. Like even the prescribed stuff, they were like, let's let's do all of it, The Jewish blessings, the Muslim blessings, uh, bring in the wet nurse, so on and so forth. You hold the baby, yeah. I know, Kyle. I made the same face, like, what?
Oh, I'm just looking ahead, actually. But
Okay.
Brown talking about them trying to purely analytical, put into categories and not really knowing, like it's yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. Our conception of healing must follow the lines of our treatment of digestion. The organism does not will to subdue something external to it, but it is healed by disentangling itself from something which is particular and which it must regard as beneath its dignity, and by coming to itself. Uh,
Yeah, I guess makes we did talk about digestion and excretion, right? Before, like
yeah.
that's taking what is outside of itself and turning it into itself.
Yep.
Oh,
So he's talking about medicine here. Homeopathy, fasting. He talks about a lot of this shit. He talks about you know, vegetative nature being a source of medication, salt, leaves, green plants, etc., and their effects on the blood. Third way of healing corresponding to the third type of disease is that, oh, I want to read this, is that which acts on the universal aspect of the organism. It is here that magnetism has its place. The organism as immaterially, immanently universal is to be raised above itself and brought back to itself. And this can be brought about externally, since therefore the self is simple, falls outside the disease organism. It is the fingertips of the magnet. What?
I think it's more metaphorical because it has that like the shape of magnetism, the way it kind of comes out and comes back around to itself. That's
Yeah,
it's another form of loop, him alluding to previous shapes, not literal magnetism.
right. Yeah, magnetism in Hegel's system is a shape, is a particular shape of dialectically related terms that circle back, like you said.
It
Which,
can't.
which, if I could remember magnetism at this at this junction, that probably actually works rather well.
Yeah, I think it's also like it's another parts in the whole you can't separate because the two halves produce each other only in that fluid movement.
Yeah,
And so it's just sort of returning to itself in a positive fluid loop. Okay.
yeah,
So it's becoming
Well,
healthy. Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
It's becoming healthy again. Yeah.
well,
In
just
this,
a Hegel,
oh, go
it might
ahead.
be both literal and metaphorical. Because there were physicians who tried treating people by actually using magnetism.
Still
That was
do.
something else thing in Hegel's day.
Well,
I
people
mean, if you
still
think
do.
about
Yeah.
it, magnetic therapy is a thing.
Yeah, yeah, what
Uh,
it was in Hegel's day. So I think for him, it's both literal and metaphorical.
Interesting. So 374, in disease, the animal is entangled with a non-organic power and is held fast in one of its particular systems or organs in opposition to the unity of its vitality. Its organism as a determinate existence has a certain quantitative strength and is indeed capable of overcoming its dividedness. People can heal, but the organism can just as well succumb to it and find in it the matter of its death. The animal, in overcoming and ridding itself of particular inadequacies, does not put an end to the general inadequacy which is inherent in it, namely that its idea is only the immediate idea. That is animal, it stands within nature, and its subjectivity is only implicitly the notion, but is not for itself, its own self, the notion. The inner universality, therefore, remains opposed to the natural singularity of the living being as the negative power from which the animal suffers violence and perishes, because natural existence as such does not itself contain this universality and is not therefore the reality which corresponds to it. Let's see here. The organism which is abandoned by self brings about its own death, but disease, strictly speaking, is so far as it is not a fatal process, is the outer existent course of the movement from its singular to the universal. In the organic sphere, the necessity of death as of all else, does not consist in particular causes, for it lies in the nature of the organism itself that the cause be something external. There is always a remedy for particular disease. This is an interesting opinion. For the latter, as such, is weak and cannot be the ground of death. The ground is the necessity of the transition of the individuality into universality. For the living being as alive is the one-sidedness of existence as itself, but the genus is the movement of just sublating the individual merely immediate self and then relapsing into this sublation, a process in which the merely immediate singular perishes. Death, simply from old age, is an impotence, a general simple state of decline. The outer signs of this are an increasing ossification and the slackening of muscles, blah, 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 blah. This merely quantitative behavior, but is qualitative as a specific process, was strictly speaking the disease, not weakness or excessive strength, which is a completely superficial explanation. No, no, notice the quantitative turning over into qualitative.
He was kind of more saying that you can talk about in a quantitative sense, but there's a qualitative aspect behind it. Again,
Yeah,
people quantitizing things away from the measure they are.
yeah,
But yeah, it's just that's why quantitative turns into qualitative. But we already knew that.
yeah.
Just the way he was using it there.
Let's see here.
It's self-induced destruction. Oh,
The universality which makes the animal as a singular, a finite existence, reveals itself in it as the abstract power which terminates the internal process active within the animal, a process which is itself abstract. The disparity between its finitude and universality is its original disease and the inborn germ of death. And the removal of this disparity is itself the accomplishment of this destiny. The individual removes this disparity and giving its singularity the form of universality. But insofar as this universality is abstract and immediate, the individual achieves only an abstract objectivity in which its activity has become deadened and ossified, and the process of life has become the inertia of habit. It is in this way that the animal brings about its own destruction. So the organism can recover from disease, but disease is in its very nature, and herein lies the necessity of death. Okay.
Also, the individual organism dies, but the genus continues on.
mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think he says that the continued existence of the genus is dependent on the fact that individual organisms do die.
Yeah. In nature, universality is manifested only negatively, in that subjectivity is sublated in it. The form in which this separation is accomplished is precisely the consummation of the singular, which converts itself into the universal but cannot endure this universality. Yeah. In life, the animal maintains itself. It is true against its non-organic nature and its genus, but its genus as the universal in the end retains the upper hand. The living being as a singular dies from the habit of life in that it lives itself into its body and into its reality. Vitality makes itself for itself into the universal, in that the activities become universal, and it is this universality that the vitality itself dies, so on and so forth. Okay. But this achieved identity with the universal is the sublation of the formal opposition between the immediate singularity of the individual and its universality. And this is only one side, and that the abstract side, namely the death of the natural being. But in the idea of life, subjectivity is the notion, and it is thus in itself the absolute being within self of actuality and concrete universality. Through the sublation of the immediacy of its reality, just demonstrated, subjectivity has coalesced with itself. The last self externality of nature has been sublated, and the notion which in nature is present only in principle has become for itself. With this, nature is passed over into its truth, into the subjectivity of the notion, whose objectivity is itself the sublated immediacy of singularity, is concrete universality, so that the notion is posited as having for its determinate being the reality which corresponds to it, namely the notion, and this is spirit. And this is the final entry, I believe. So, hang on. Yeah, it
Yep.
is. So let's read through the Zuzats real quick because this is the transition to spirit. Okay. Above this death of nature, from this dead husk proceeds a more beautiful nature, spirit. The living being ends with this division and this abstract coalescence within itself. But the one moment contradicts the other. That which has coalesced is for that reason identical. Notion or genus and reality or subject and object are no longer divided, and that which has repelled and divided itself is for that very reason not abstractly identical. The truth is their unity as distinct moments, therefore, the truth is their unity as distinct moments. There it is. Therefore, in this coalescence and in this division, what is sublated is only formal opposition because of the intrinsic identity of the moments. And similarly, what is negated is only formal identity because of their division. So formality falls away, right? Separateness, I guess you could say. That is to say, in more concrete terms, the notion of life, the genus, life in its universality, repels from itself its reality, which has become a totality within it, but it is in itself identical with this reality. Is idea, is absolutely preserved as the divine, the eternal, and therefore abides in this reality. And what has been sublated is only the form, the inadequacy of natural existence, the still only abstract externality of time and space. The living being is, it is true, the supreme mode of the notion's existence in nature, but here too the notion is present only in principle because the idea exists in nature only as a singular. Certainly in locomotion, the animal is completely liberated from gravity. In sensation, it feels itself, and in voice, it hears itself. In the genus process, the genus exists, but still only as a singular. Now, since this existence is still inadequate to the universality of the idea, and this is the crux I think he's starting to get into, right? This existence is still inadequate to the universality of the idea. The idea is thought, human thought. It's not enough to be just simply an animal. You have to be a human animal to be adequate to the universality of the idea. The idea must break out of this circle and by shattering this inadequate form, make room for itself. Therefore, instead of the third moment in the genus process sinking back again into singularity, the other side, death, is the sublating of the singular, therewith the emergence of the genus, the procession of spirit for the negation of natural being, i.e., of immediate singularity, is this, that the universal, the genus, is posited, and that too in the form of genus. Okay? In the individuality, this movement of the two sides is the process which sublates itself and whose result is consciousness, unity, the unity in and for itself of both as self, not merely as genus in the inner notion of the singular. Herewith, the idea exists in the self-subsistent subject, for which, as organ of the notion, everything is ideal and fluid. That is, the subject thinks, makes everything in time and space its own, and in this way has universality, i.e., its own self present within it. Since in this way the universal is now for the universal, therefore the notion is for itself. This is first manifested in spirit, in which the notion makes itself objective to itself, but in doing so, the existence of the notion as notion is posited. Thought, as this universal which exists for itself, is immortal being. Mortal being is that in which the idea, the universal, exists in an inadequate form. So basically, there's our animal self, and there's our, which is inadequate, and there's our immortal self, which is in thought, right? Our mind, versus, yeah, so he's
Aristotelian idea.
what?
That's an that's Aristotle's idea.
But notice how in the form of spirit, the inadequate form is sublated into the adequate form. It's not simply opposed to it,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
Um,
yeah,
like in well in Descartes, in another form, the soul and the body are separated and placed into opposition. Like they can't be of the same thing. Descartes is not a monist; he's a dualist.
Yeah.
Uh, Hegel is right here, um, saying that the human consists of both the inadequate form and the universal adequate form. Yeah, this
also,
is. Oh, go ahead.
just also recalling last time the notion was for itself in a different way was when we moved to notion itself in a way, right? Or the being became fully for itself when being in essence showed to be the same. So that's what's happening here again at a higher level.
Yeah,
The notion is in nature becoming for itself is
for itself.
becoming conscious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-consciousness.
So this is the transition from nature to spirit. In the living being, nature finds its consummation and has made its peace, in that it is transformed into a higher existence. Spirit has thus proceeded from nature. Yeah, see, yeah, because when you go from the absolute idea to nature, sort of, you turn it around and you see that the thoughts are products of the brain, which is of nature, right? But here he's kind of saying the same thing, but only on a higher level, and more concretized, right? So spirit has thus proceeded from nature. Literally, that's the singular sentence right there at the end of the philosophy of nature. The goal of nature is to destroy itself and to break through its husk of immediate sensuous experience, to consume itself like the phoenix in order to come forth from this externality rejuvenated as spirit. I love this. I mean, the very next sentence, we're like the phoenix, right? Nature has become an other to itself in order to recognize itself again as idea and to reconcile itself with itself. But it is one-sided to regard spirit in this way as having only become in actual existence after being merely a potentiality. True nature is the immediate, but even so, as the other of spirit, its existence is a relativity, and so as the negative, its being is only posited, derivative. It is the power of free spirit which sublates this negativity, exactly as I just said in a different way. Spirit is no less before than after nature. It is not merely the metaphysical idea of it. Spirit, just because it is the goal of nature, is prior to it. Yes, nature is proceeded from spirit, not empirically, however, but in such a manner that spirit is already from the very first implicitly present in nature, which is spirit's own presupposition. Marx uses language like this when talking about capital and how capitalist production is a prerequisite to the commodity. You know what I mean?
Also, what was that article recently? I think you posted it as well.
What, Harrison and Landon's?
Autonomous.
Okay. So I reposted that, but I haven't read it yet. But whoever that is talks about the automated subject, and I'm not entirely sure I'm not entirely sure which side of the spectrum they are as far as Hegel goes. I'd have to read it. I posted it for later reading, so I couldn't tell you one way or the other. Okay. Spirit, just because it. All right. Blah 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 blah. Non empirically, however, but in such a manner that spirit is already from the very first implicitly present in nature, which is spirit's own presupposition. There we go. But spirit, in its infinite freedom, gives nature a free existence And the idea is active in nature as an inner necessity, just as a free man of the world is sure that his action is the world's activity. Spirit, therefore, itself proceeding in the first instance from the immediate, but then abstractly apprehending itself, wills to achieve its own liberation by fashioning nature out of itself. This action of spirit is philosophy. So basically, what he's saying is spirit proceeds from nature, but then it thinks thoughts about nature that reconstructs it in the thought realm. And, and the action, that action is called philosophy. He's basically saying that when you philosophize about what's around you, you recreate nature in your thoughts, right? And the more accurate you get, the better you can interact with nature itself, right? Because if you have an accurate roadmap, you can go down the right roads, right? If you have an inaccurate one, you're going to be bumbling. You're going to say, I can take a mercury bath and it'll make me feel better. That's a bad idea. That's an inaccurate roadmap. I don't know why I went down that route there.
Ivermectin is going to cure all
Yes, yeah, ivermectin will cure COVID. You at that point you're purely within philosophy. You're purely within thought, but you're not necessarily making it conform with nature. You know, with this, we have brought our treatment of nature to its boundary. Spirit, which has apprehended itself, also wills to know itself in nature, to make good again the loss of itself. This reconciliation of spirit with nature and with actuality is alone its genuine liberation, in which it sheds its merely personal habits of thought and ways of looking at things. This liberation from nature and nature's necessity is the notion of the philosophy of nature. Well, that's a big one. That's huge. This liberation from nature and nature's necessity is the notion of the philosophy of nature.
That's something that Frederick Engels develops later on.
Yes. Yeah. And I guarantee you, Ingalls looked at the sentence and said, right there, that's it. The forms which nature wears are only forms of the notion, although in the element of externality. It is true that these forms, as grades of nature, are grounded in the notion, but even where the notion gathers itself together in sensation, it is still not yet present to itself as notion. So if we remember our phenomenology, he goes over sensation, and sensation is short of the notion within within that. Yeah. The difficulty of the philosophy of nature lies just in this. First, because the material element is so refractory towards the unity of the notion, and secondly, because spirit has to deal with an ever-increasing wealth of detail. You look out in the world today, you look into a telescope and you see how far humankind has to go to be able to, the further we look, the more detail we pile up, right? So there's all this material.
Down.
What?
Yeah, we look up and then we look down, smaller and smaller. Now we're like,
bigger and bigger, and smaller and smaller. We have conflicting sciences of very large and very small too. And how do we reconcile them? And we have various ways of doing that.
Which is funny because I just realized that's, Neil deGrasse Tyson, his anti-philosophy stance. Well, a lot of scientists are like, wait, we actually need philosophy to understand what we're looking at.
Right, because you have to have a common language in which to talk about the same thing in the first place. If you just say, well, we don't need philosophy, you can just throw out any old word you want and pretend that it's going to do just as well as anything else.
It's claiming you don't have a metaphysics means you have an unexplored metaphysics.
One other thing I found with people who are very militantly against philosophy is that you have to translate it into terms that they are familiar with and they will actually accept. Like if I talk to my dad about philosophy and he says, what the hell is it good for? And I tell him, look, here's Hegel's logic. You know, what are you looking at? You're looking at a categorization. I start with the fact that you're looking at a categorization scheme very similar to what we do in libraries. We get a whole bunch of stuff together and then we order it according to a scheme of some kind. Hegel uses the ordering scheme that comports to the material itself. So when he looks at thought, he lets thought order itself. This is what Hegel is talking about. When Hegel approaches thought, he lets thought order itself. When Hegel approaches nature, he lets nature order itself, right? When he looks at spirit, as we're about to see, spirit is going to order itself according to the standards of spirit's own dialectic, from abstract to concrete, right? But the point, the end point of those of those circles and the transition to the next circle is, I think, what defines that circle as a whole. Because at the end of logic, we find that being, and we went over this months and months ago, maybe last year or the year before, that being turns out to be this whole thing populated and differentiated in and of itself. At first, to us, it was just this abstract label. At the end of the logic, being turns out to be the absolute idea, and the absolute idea, you know, if you look at it backwards, proceeded from nature, right? It turned out to be a natural thing, I guess you could say. Let's see. Let me finish reading this because we're right at 9 o'clock and we can finish the book. You know, the forms which nature wears are only forms of the notion, although in the element of externality, blah, blah, blah. Notion. Okay, it's still not present. All right. The difficulty of, I backed up. The difficulty of the philosophy of notion lies just in this. First, because the material element is so refractory towards the unity of the notion. And secondly, because spirit has to deal with an ever-increasing level of detail. We said that. Nonetheless, reason must have confidence in itself. Confidence that in nature the notion speaks to the notion, and that the veritable form of the notion which lies concealed beneath nature's scattered and infinitely many shapes will reveal itself to reason. This to me, oh my God. Okay. China Mieville and Richard Seymour need to read this last Zusatz because it basically spits all over their idea that you cannot know nature in its fullness. Hegel right here says very clearly that nature is knowable. Nature will reveal itself to reason, and that we should have the confidence to carry on because there's nothing that's unknowable. There's nothing that's supernatural about it. It's purely natural and it's purely knowable, right? Reason is rational. The rational is what's that quote? Okay, this is another way of saying exactly that the rational is reasonable and the reasonable is rational.
The rational is actual is rational, or vice versa.
Yeah, exactly, or words to that effect. This is another way of saying that. This is another way of sort of wrapping up the proof and saying, look, the entirety of nature is knowable, and it's knowable by the idea through the notion. You can find the notion of all of nature. If you come across it, you study it, you get all that material together, and you order it according to itself. You let the subject order itself, right?
Also, just realizing the way you're saying that corollary is to say that there is a thing in itself that you can't know is itself supernatural. So inherently, if only natural exists, yeah, it's like the saying that the thing itself is unknowable is an implication of a supernatural in some form.
Yes, that is exactly the implication, and the funny thing is that Kant is of two minds. If you read the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant is more he's more of a dialectical character.
Yeah.
If you read the Critique of Practical Reason, he comes down hard and says, look, we have faith and we need to keep the mind body problem, unsolved. It's the hard problem, right? You can't solve it. There's the spirit and there's the body. You can't you can't fully deal with that, and therefore God exists. He doesn't exactly say it that way, or maybe he does. I haven't
Well,
read
it's
Kant yet.
the antinomies, but
Yeah.
using mind body problem as an antinomy. Okay.
Yeah, Yeah, the mind body problem is the biggest antinomy, and it's church enforced, unfortunately. Like Stalin. Stalin said that Hegel's great, but the Central Committee takes precedence. He was just another version of the church saying, you know, discuss, but you'll do what I say. His final summation, and this is such a short paragraph. Oh my God. Let us briefly survey the field we have covered. At first, the idea was in gravity, freely disbanded into a body whose members are the free heavenly bodies. Then this externality fashioned itself inwardly into properties and qualities which, belonging to an individual unity, had in the chemical process an immanent and physical movement. Finally, in the living being, gravity is disbanded into members in which the subjective unity abides. The aim of these lectures has been to give a picture of nature in order to subdue this Proteus, to find in this externality only the mirror of ourselves, to see in nature a free reflex of spirit, to know God not in the contemplation of him as spirit, but in his immediate existence. The, this this final this final thing here, he is a Spinozist through and through. God is not a spirit separate from our existence, but is the existence itself. Do you see this? And I think this was written down by a student in his class who basically heard him say this, or words to that effect. Okay. That's very exciting. And we're done.
And then
What do
next
y'all
is
So next week, as long as everyone's up for it, we'll proceed directly into the philosophy of spirit.
I've already taken a look. I'd recommend just reading the introduction. Because
Okay.
that's about 28 pages, but it's also just getting started. So
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. It's 9:05, and I think we can I think we can knock this off our TBR.
yep,
Okay.
that's what I'm doing now digitally.
I just finished this book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are y'all off to? Ice cream?
All right.
Oh, okay. Well, have a good dinner. All right, folks. So, for everybody watching, we finished the philosophy of nature. We're going to go into the philosophy of spirit and reading the introduction and we'll just talk about the introduction next time. We won't necessarily go line by line next time, but just talk about it in general, unless you have quotes. Well, yeah, we can quote from the introduction more easily. All right. I'll talk to you online, but you gentlemen have a great week, and we'll see you then.
Cheers.
Come.